The Hammer and the Helipad. The night Frank Sinatra went to war, the sound wasn't a scream. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the sickening crunch of hardened steel hitting reinforced concrete. 3 o'clock in the morning, Palm Springs. The desert air was cold, but the man standing in the middle of the garden was sweating. He was wearing a silk robe that cost more than most men made in a year. His hands, usually manicured to perfection, usually holding a microphone or a glass of Jack Daniels, were now gripping the handle of a 10-pound sledgehammer. Frank Sinatra was destroying his own home. He swung the hammer again and again. Chips of concrete flew into the night air like shrapnel. He was aiming for the center of the helipad. The helipad he had spent thousands of dollars building. The helipad he had poured his pride, his ego, and his desperate need for acceptance into. With every blow, he wasn't just breaking rock. He was breaking a friendship. He was breaking a political alliance. He was breaking his own heart. To anyone watching from the shadows, he would have looked like a madman, a lunatic destroying paradise. But Frank Sinatra wasn't crazy. He was heartbroken, and he was dangerous, because the man he was destroying this helipad for, the man who was supposed to land here in less than 48 hours, the man Frank had helped put in the White House, had just sent him a message that didn't come in a sealed envelope, but in a humiliating phone call that shattered Frank Sinatra's world into a million jagged pieces. John F. Kennedy was not coming. And Frank Sinatra was about to learn the most painful lesson of his life, that in the halls of true power, loyalty is a myth, and friendship is just a transaction. To understand the rage that fueled every swing of that hammer, we have to go back. We have to peel away the layers of the legend and look at the hungry, ambitious, insecure man underneath. Frank Sinatra wasn't born royalty. He was a skinny Italian kid from Hoboken, New Jersey. He had scraped and clawed his way to the top of the world. By 1960, he was the chairman of the board. He was the king of Hollywood. He had money, he had women, he had fame. But there was one thing Frank didn't have. One thing he craved more than air: respectability. True American blue blood respectability. He wanted a seat at the big table, not the table in the back of the club with the wise guys and the hustlers. He wanted the table where history was written. And in John F. Kennedy, Frank saw his ticket. Jack Kennedy was everything Frank wasn't. He was tall, handsome, educated, wealthy, and Irish Catholic royalty. He was the Prince of America. And Frank decided that he would be the one to put the crown on Jack's head. The relationship started like a romance. Frank fell in love with the idea of Kennedy. He campaigned for him with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He re-recorded his hit song, High Hopes, to be the Kennedy campaign anthem. He organized fundraisers. He mobilized Hollywood. He brought the glitz, the glamour, and the star power that the stiff patrician Kennedy clan lacked. Frank made Jack cool, but Frank brought something else to the table, something dark, something dangerous, something that would eventually poison everything. Frank brought the Chicago outfit. It is the open secret of American history, the dirty little engine that powered the shiny vehicle of Camelot. In 1960, the election was tight. Too tight. Kennedy needed every vote he could get, especially in key states like Illinois and West Virginia. And Frank Sinatra knew a guy. He knew Sam Giancana, Momo, the boss of Chicago, the man who had inherited Al Capone's empire and expanded it into a corporate monster. Frank and Sam were close. They played golf. They shared drinks. They shared secrets. And, as history suggests, they shared women. Frank Sinatra became the bridge, the bagman, the liaison between the White House and the underworld. He went to Sam Giancana and asked for help. He asked the mob to deliver the unions. He asked them to lean on the local ward bosses. He asked them to guarantee that Illinois would go to Kennedy. And Sam Giancana delivered. Why? Because he thought he was buying insurance. He thought that if he helped put a friend in the White House, the federal heat on the mob would cool down. He thought having Frank Sinatra as the middleman meant they were untouchable. He thought they were all part of the same club. Frank believed this too. He truly believed that once Jack was president, the doors of the White House would be open to him. He imagined nights in the Lincoln bedroom. He imagined being the unofficial advisor to the president. He imagined the legitimacy that would wash away the stain of Hoboken, the stain of the mugshots, the stain of the gangster whispers, So when Kennedy won, Frank was on top of the world. He organized the inaugural gala. He was the master of ceremonies. He walked around Washington, D.C. like he owned the pavement. He was the court jester who had become the king's favorite. And then came the plan for the visit. In March 1962, President Kennedy was scheduled to visit California, and naturally he needed a place to stay, a place that was secure, luxurious, and private. Frank stepped up immediately. He offered his estate in Palm Springs. It wasn't just an offer, it was a demand. He told the Secret Service, he told the White House staff, he told anyone who would listen, "The president stays with me." Frank went to work. He didn't just clean the house, he rebuilt it. He wanted to create a palace fit for his king. He built cottages for the Secret Service agents on the property. He installed dozens of extra telephone lines, including a direct, secure line to the White House in Washington. He expanded the dining room to accommodate state dinners. He brought in the finest chefs, the best linens, the most expensive wines, but the crown jewel was the helipad. Frank knew the president would arrive by helicopter, so he poured concrete in the middle of the desert. He constructed a state-of-the-art landing pad right there in his compound. It was more than a piece of infrastructure. It was a monument. It was a physical symbol that said, "The president lands here. The most powerful man on earth steps onto my soil. We are equals. We are brothers." Frank spent days overseeing the construction. He watched the concrete dry. He polished the surface. He imagined the moment the chopper would descend, the dust swirling, the door opening, and his friend Jack stepping out, smiling, shaking his hand, validating Frank's entire existence. Frank told everyone. He told the Rat Pack. He told the press. He told the waiters at his favorite restaurants, "The president is staying at my house." It was the ultimate flex, the ultimate victory. But while Frank was building his monument in the desert, a dossier was landing on a desk in Washington, D.C., a desk that belonged to the one man who hated Frank Sinatra more than anyone else in the world, Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General, the president's brother. Bobby Kennedy was the anti-Frank. He was a crusader, a rigid, moralistic, relentless prosecutor who had made it his life's mission to destroy organized crime. He didn't see the romance of the mob. He didn't see the guys and dolls charm. He saw murderers, pimps, and drug dealers. And he saw Frank Sinatra not as a cool entertainer, but as a pimp for the mafia. Bobby had the files. He had the FBI surveillance logs. He had the wiretaps from J. Edgar Hoover. He knew about Sam Giancana. He knew about the meetings. He knew about Judith Campbell Exner, a woman who was sleeping with both the President of the United States and the head of the Chicago mob, introduced to both of them by Frank Sinatra. Bobby looked at the schedule for the California trip. He saw Sinatra Estate on the itinerary, and he went to his brother. The conversation that happened in the Oval Office is lost to history, but we know the outcome. Bobby laid it out. "Jack, you cannot stay at Sinatra's house. It's suicide. If the press finds out, if the Republicans find out that you are sleeping in a bed made by the mob, your presidency is over. The man is radioactive. You have to cut him loose." JFK was a pragmatist. He liked Frank. He enjoyed the parties, the women, the fun. But he loved his power more. He loved his presidency more. Without a second thought, without a moment of hesitation for the loyalty Frank had shown him, Jack nodded. Change the plans. But they didn't call Frank immediately. They let him build. They let him spend the money. They let him brag. They let him dig the hole of humiliation deeper and deeper. Then 2 days before the visit, the phone rang in Palm Springs. Frank picked it up on the first ring. He was expecting the Secret Service to confirm the arrival time. He was ready. The champagne was on ice. The helipad was swept clean. But it wasn't the Secret Service. And it wasn't Jack. It was Peter Lawford. Peter Lawford was Frank's brother-in-law, married to JFK's sister, Patricia. He was a member of the Rat Pack. He was the British aristocrat who Frank had taken under his wing. Frank loved Peter, but he also used him. Peter was the direct line to the Kennedys. Peter's voice was shaking. He was terrified. He knew he was holding a grenade, and he had to throw it into Frank's living room. "Frank," Peter stammered, "there's been a change of plans." Frank went still. "What kind of change?" "The security," Peter lied. "The Secret Service. They think your place. The geography. The hills. It's difficult to secure. They're worried about snipers. They're worried about access." Frank gripped the phone. I built cottages for them, Peter. I put in the lines. I built a goddamn helipad. It's a fortress. What are you talking about? I know, Frank. I know. But the decision has been made. Jack isn't coming to your house. The silence on. The line was deafening. It stretched for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Frank felt the blood draining from his face. He felt the phantom laughter of everyone he had bragged to. Where is he staying? Frank asked. His voice was a whisper, a dangerous low hiss. Peter didn't want to answer. He knew this was the kill shot. Bing Crosby's place, Peter said. If Peter had said almost anyone else, it might have been bearable. But Bing Crosby, the old crooner, the rival Frank had spent his career trying to eclipse. Bing Crosby was a Republican. Bing Crosby didn't have mob ties. Bing Crosby was safe. Bing Crosby was everything Frank wasn't. It was the ultimate insult. It was a slap in the face so hard it echoed across the entire state of California. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a replacement. You were too dirty for us, Frank. We prefer the clean guy, the safe guy. Frank hung up the phone. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't scream at Peter, not yet. He stood in the middle of his living room, surrounded by the luxury he had curated for a guest who would never arrive. The betrayal washed over him like a tidal wave. It wasn't just about the visit. It was about 1960. It was about the favors. It was about the risk. Frank had put his career on the line for Jack. He had put his life on the line by involving Sam Giancana, and Sam Giancana wasn't going to be happy. That was the other shoe dropping. Frank had promised the mob access. He had promised that having a friend in the White House would pay off. Now, he looked like a fool. He looked like a man who had been played. And in the mob, when you look like a fool, you become a liability. Frank walked out the back door. He walked past the pool, past the guest cottages. He walked to the center of the garden, to that pristine, perfect slab of concrete, the helipad. He stared at it. It mocked him. It was a tombstone for his ambitions. It was a flat, gray reminder that he would never be one of them. He could buy the suits. He could learn the words. He could sing the songs. But to the Kennedys, he was just the help. He went to the tool shed. He found the sledgehammer. It was heavy, cold, honest. He walked back to the concrete. He lifted the hammer over his head, and he let out a roar that came from the deepest, darkest part of his soul. A roar of pure, unadulterated pain. The first swing cracked the surface. The shockwave traveled up his arms, jarring his bones. It felt good. It felt like retribution. He swung again, and again. He attacked the helipad like it was a living enemy. He wanted to erase it from the earth. He wanted to turn it back into dust. With every blow, he was killing the part of himself that needed their validation. Crack, that's for the fundraisers. Crack, that's for the song. Crack, that's for the loyalty. Crack, that's for treating me like garbage. He worked for an hour. Sweat soaked his silk robe. His hands blistered and bled. His breath came in ragged gasps. But he didn't stop. He smashed the lights. He smashed the plaque. He smashed the concrete until it was a pile of rubble, a ruin in the moonlight. When he was done, he dropped the hammer. He stood there, shaking, looking at the destruction. He had destroyed the physical symbol, but the internal damage was permanent. That night, something in Frank Sinatra died. The optimism died. The belief in the system died. The hope died. And in its place, something colder was born. A cynicism that would define the rest of his life. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Frank blamed Peter Lawford. He decided that Peter should have fought harder. He decided that Peter was a traitor. Frank cut him out of the Rat Pack instantly. He fired him from the upcoming movie Robin and the Seven Hoods. He told Sammy and Dean that if they spoke to Peter, they were dead to him too. Peter Lawford lost his career, his friends, and eventually his marriage, all because he was the messenger of Frank's humiliation. Frank never forgave JFK. The assassination a year later in 1963 devastated him, yes, but it also complicated his grief with unresolved anger. He cried for the man, but he hated the politician, and the political shift was seismic. Frank Sinatra, the greatest Democrat in Hollywood, the man who had bled blue, slowly began to turn. The betrayal pushed him to the right. Years later, he would become the closest friend of Ronald Reagan. He would campaign for Republicans. He would spend his old age railing against the liberal elites who had used him and tossed him aside. But the most dangerous consequence was with the mob. Sam Giancana was furious. He felt Frank had lied to him. He felt Frank had failed to deliver. The buffer between the singer and the gangster evaporated. Frank spent the next decade looking over his shoulder, dealing with the very real threat of men who didn't use sledgehammers on concrete, but on kneecaps. The legend of Frank Sinatra is usually painted in gold and neon. We see the tuxedos, the whiskey, the swagger. But the real story of Frank Sinatra is written in that rubble in Palm Springs. It is the story of a man who reached for the sun and got burned. A man who thought that talent and loyalty were enough to buy entry into the American aristocracy, only to find the gates locked tight. If you go to Palm Springs today, the estate is still there. The pool is still there. The glamour is preserved in amber. But if you look closely at the ground, if you know where to look, you can feel the phantom vibrations of that hammer. You can hear the sound of a heart breaking. Frank Sinatra proved that night that he was capable of immense destruction. He destroyed a helipad. He destroyed a friendship. He destroyed a political alliance. But in the end, what he really destroyed was his own innocence. He learned the lesson that every outsider eventually learns. They will drink your wine. They will listen to your songs. They will take your money. And they will laugh at your jokes. But they will never, ever let you be one of them. And if you try to build a landing pad for them, be prepared to tear it down with your own bleeding hands. Frank Sinatra went to his grave a legend, but on that night in 1962, he was just a man alone in the desert, realizing that the only person he could truly count on was the guy in the mirror, the guy from Hoboken, the guy with the hammer. Because in the end, paradise isn't something you build for others, it's something you have to defend from them, and sometimes defense looks a lot like destruction. That is the true story of the night the music stopped in Palm Springs. The night the chairman of the board resigned from the club that never really wanted him. The night Frank Sinatra finally understood the difference between being a star and being a brother. He picked up the pieces of his pride, washed the concrete dust from his hands, put on his tuxedo, and went back to work. He sang, "That's life." And for the first time, he really truly meant every single word. I've been a puppet. A pauper, a pirate, a poet, a pawn, and a king. I've been up and down and over and out. He had been a king, and then he had been a pawn. And that night, with a sledgehammer in his hand, he decided he would never be a pawn again.